What if one moment of kindness changed your entire life forever? Keisha Williams never expected it would happen to her. Joaquin, the massive Hell's Angel, lay trapped under his twisted Harley, blood pooling in the rain around the wreckage. Cars slowed down, took one look at the skull patches and gang colors, then sped away. Too dangerous, too risky. But Keisha ran straight toward the crash. At 19, homeless and living on Richmond's streets, she had nothing but a medical volunteer badge and a heart that wouldn't let her watch someone die. She crawled under the motorcycle, found his pulse, and fought to save his life. "You're going to be okay." She had no idea she'd just rescued Steele Morrison, the billion-dollar shadow king who controlled every judge, politician, and police chief in Richmond. Sometimes helping a stranger becomes the best decision of your life. But Keisha's morning routine wasn't like most teenagers, and today's small choice would set everything in motion. 5:30 a.m. The cardboard beneath her back was soaked from last night's rain. Keisha Williams stretched carefully, checking that her hidden mason jar of savings was still buried under the loose brick. $43. Every penny earned from cleaning, odd jobs, and the occasional under-the-table medical help she provided on the streets. Her shelter sat behind Richmond Medical Center, tucked between two dumpsters where the security cameras couldn't see. Not glamorous, but strategic. Close enough to slip into the hospital's employee bathroom before her volunteer shift. Far enough from the main homeless camps to avoid the drama, the drugs, and the danger. Keisha folded her cardboard carefully. In this neighborhood, even trash had value. She pulled her clean volunteer scrubs from the plastic bag she kept buried with her money. The blue fabric was faded but spotless. She'd learned that appearance mattered in the medical world. Look professional, get treated professionally. Look homeless, get ignored. The employee bathroom was empty at this hour. Keisha washed quickly in the sink, brushing her teeth with the travel toothbrush she kept in her pocket. Her reflection stared back, tired eyes but determined jaw. She pinned her volunteer badge to her scrub top. Keisha Williams, patient care volunteer. It was the only identity that mattered to her now. Walking through the hospital corridors, she felt the familiar mix of purpose and longing. This place represented everything she wanted, but couldn't afford. The nurses moved with confidence she envied. The doctors commanded respect she craved. But for now, she was just the volunteer who restocked supplies and held patients' hands. "Morning, Keisha." Mrs. Carter, the volunteer coordinator, smiled warmly. "You're early again. Couldn't sleep." Keisha didn't mention the sirens that had woken her at 3 a.m. or the shouting match between dealers that had kept her alert until dawn. Mrs. Carter handed her the supply cart. "The third floor needs restocking, and Mrs. Patterson in 312 specifically asked for you yesterday. She says you have healing hands." Keisha's chest warmed. Mrs. Patterson reminded her of her grandmother, the woman who'd raised her before cancer took her away 3 years ago. The woman whose medical bills had eaten their savings and left 16-year-old Keisha with nothing but a fierce determination to understand medicine. On the third floor, she moved efficiently through her routine, replacing bandages, organizing medical supplies, checking on patients who couldn't afford private care. Her volunteer work had taught her more about medicine than any textbook. She'd watched surgeries from the observation deck, memorized medication names, and absorbed every conversation between doctors and nurses. In her pocket, she carried a worn first aid certification card. She'd studied it so many times the lamination was cracking. It represented her dream, to become a real medical professional someday, not just someone who restocked supplies, but someone who actually saved lives. "Keisha?" Mrs. Patterson's voice was weak but warm. "Come sit with me, honey." The elderly woman's hand felt paper-thin in Keisha's. Stage 4 lung cancer. No family, no visitors except the volunteer who reminded her of the granddaughter she'd never had. "Tell me about your dreams again," Mrs. Patterson whispered. Keisha glanced around the room, then leaned closer. "I'm going to be a nurse someday. Maybe even a doctor. I'm going to help people who can't help themselves. You already do that, sweetheart. Every day." The words hit deeper than Mrs. Patterson probably realized. Keisha did help people, not just in the hospital but on the streets. When someone overdosed in an alley, when fights turned bloody, when accidents happened in neighborhoods where calling 911 meant inviting police attention nobody wanted. She'd treated knife wounds with butterfly bandages, talked people through panic attacks. Once, she'd even helped deliver a baby in an abandoned building, all using skills she'd picked up volunteering and studying medical texts in the hospital library. But none of it was official. None of it counted. She was just a homeless girl playing doctor. Her shift ended at 4 p.m. Walking back to her cardboard shelter, Keisha passed the construction sites that were reshaping Richmond. New buildings, expensive condos, luxury offices, progress that was pushing people like her further into the shadows. She stopped at the corner store, counting out exact change for a package of crackers and a bottle of water. Dinner. The clerk barely looked at her, just another poor kid buying the cheapest food available. Back at her shelter, she pulled out her medical textbook, a water-damaged copy of Emergency Medicine Procedures that someone had thrown away. Under the dim light of a stolen flashlight, she studied diagrams of trauma care, memorizing techniques she prayed she'd never need to use. But Richmond streets had taught her that medical emergencies didn't wait for convenient locations or qualified professionals. Sometimes a homeless girl with a volunteer badge was the only thing standing between life and death. She had no idea that in less than 6 hours, that knowledge would save the life of the most powerful man in the city. As thunder rumbled overhead, Keisha pulled the tarp over her cardboard and tried to sleep. Tomorrow would bring another day of surviving, another day of dreaming, another day of hoping that somehow her determination would be enough to escape the streets forever. The first drops of rain began to fall. The storm that hit Richmond that evening would test everything Keisha thought she knew about helping strangers. By 7 p.m., the rain was coming down in sheets. Keisha had planned to spend the evening in the hospital library, but security had started asking questions about why she stayed so late. Better to leave before someone figured out she had nowhere else to go. The walk back to her shelter normally took 15 minutes. Tonight, it felt like walking through a waterfall. Her volunteer scrubs clung to her skin, and her medical supplies, carefully wrapped in plastic bags, pressed against her back like a lifeline. The Riverside Overpass offered the only real shelter between the hospital and her cardboard home. Keisha knew the risks. This stretch of highway belonged to the Hells Angels, their territory, their rules. But with lightning splitting the sky and rain turning the streets into rivers, she had no choice. She pressed herself against the concrete pillar, trying to stay invisible. The overpass echoed with the sound of rain and rushing traffic above. Most cars had slowed to a crawl, their headlights cutting through the downpour like weak searchlights. Then she heard them. The deep, unmistakable rumble of Harley-Davidson engines. Even through the storm, the sound made her stomach clench with fear. Keisha had learned to recognize that particular mechanical heartbeat. It meant danger was coming. 3 motorcycles roared past her hiding spot, their riders hunched against the rain. Expensive bikes, custom paint jobs gleaming even in the storm. These weren't weekend warriors or wannabes. These were the real deal. The lead bike was massive, a pristine Harley worth more than most people's houses. Its rider sat tall and confident despite the weather, its leather jacket stretched across broad shoulders. Even at highway speed, Keisha could see the intricate details. Chrome exhaust pipes, custom handlebars, and patches that marked him as someone important in the organization. She watched them disappear into the storm, their taillights fading like red stars. For a moment, she felt relieved. They were gone. She was safe. That's when she heard the sound that would change everything. Screeching brakes, the metallic shriek of the tire against wet asphalt. Then a crash that seemed to shake the entire overpass, the horrible symphony of motorcycle meeting guardrail at 60 miles per hour. Silence. Keisha waited, heart pounding. Maybe she'd imagined it. Maybe they'd driven on. Maybe. The other 2 motorcycles roared back past her, heading toward the crash site. She could hear their engines idling, then revving as they sped away, getting help or running from trouble. Either way, she was alone with whatever had happened up ahead. Keisha knew she should stay hidden. Every survival instinct screamed at her to wait until the storm passed, until the danger cleared, until someone else dealt with whatever was happening on that rain-slicked highway. But then she heard it. Faint, almost lost in the storm, but unmistakable. A groan of pain. Someone was hurt. Someone was alive. Her feet moved before her brain could stop them. Keisha stepped out from the shelter of the overpass and walked toward the crash site, rain immediately soaking through her scrubs. Each step felt like walking toward the edge of a cliff. 50 yards ahead, she could see the wreckage. The massive Harley lay twisted against the guardrail, steam rising from its engine. Chrome and leather scattered across the asphalt. The smell of gasoline mixed with rain, creating a chemical cocktail that made her nose burn, and underneath it all, trapped beneath 800 pounds of motorcycle, was the rider. He was huge, easily 6'4", broad shoulders straining against torn leather. Blood streamed from beneath his cracked helmet, mixing with rainwater on the asphalt. Tattoos covered his visible arms, intricate skulls, chains, and symbols that told a story of violence and brotherhood. The Hells Angels patches on his vest were unmistakable. President, embroidered in gold thread above a rocker that read, Richmond Chapter. This wasn't just any gang member. This was their leader. Keisha's hands shook as she approached. She'd heard stories about Steele Morrison, whispered warnings passed between homeless camps and hospital staff, the man who controlled the drug trade, the enforcer who settled disputes with violence, the president who commanded absolute loyalty from the most dangerous men in the city, and now he was dying in front of her. The gasoline smell was getting stronger. Sparks flickered near the engine. The bike's fuel tank had cracked, creating a spreading pool of flammable liquid that reflected the emergency lights like a mirror. Time was running out. Keisha looked around desperately. No other cars were stopping. No help was coming. The other bikers had disappeared, probably racing to get backup or medical assistance that might arrive too late. She pulled out her phone. No signal. The storm had knocked out the cell towers. It was just her, the rain, and the most dangerous man in Richmond bleeding out on the highway. Keisha dropped her bag and ran toward the wreckage. What happened next would prove that sometimes the smallest person can move the biggest obstacles. Keisha dropped to her knees beside the wreckage, rain immediately soaking through to her skin. The motorcycle had steel pinned from the waist down, its massive frame twisted at an angle that made lifting impossible. "Sir, can you hear me?" No response. Blood pooled beneath his cracked helmet, and his breathing was shallow, labored. Keisha's volunteer training kicked in automatically. Check the airway, check pulse, assess injuries. His pulse was weak but steady. The head wound looked worse than it was. Scalp injuries always bled heavily. But the way his leg was bent beneath the bike made her stomach clench with worry. "Stay with me, okay?" She pulled her medical supplies from their plastic wrapping. Basic first aid kit, emergency bandages, and the knowledge she'd absorbed from months of watching trauma teams work. Not much, but it would have to be enough. The bike was the problem. 800 pounds of steel and chrome pinned against the guardrail with steel trapped underneath. Keisha wrapped her hands around the frame and pulled. Nothing. The machine didn't budge an inch. Think. Think like a medic, not like a scared teenager. Leverage. She needed leverage. 20 feet away, construction crews had left materials for the highway expansion project. Keisha ran through the rain and grabbed a piece of rebar, 4 feet long, solid steel. She wedged it under the motorcycle's frame, using a chunk of concrete as a fulcrum. "This is going to hurt," she whispered, though steel couldn't hear her. She threw her entire body weight against the makeshift lever. The bike shifted slightly, maybe 6 inches, but enough. Steele's leg came free, and she could see the damage. Definitely broken, but no bone-piercing skin. He'd live if she could keep him stable. Blood was still flowing from his head wound. Keisha tore strips from her own shirt, creating pressure bandages. Her hands moved with surprising steadiness, despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. As she worked, she followed protocol and searched his pockets for identification or emergency contacts. No wallet, but her fingers found something unexpected. A platinum cell phone with missed calls lighting up the screen. "Mayor Davidson, 6 missed calls. Judge Morrison, 4 missed calls. Chief Williams, 8 missed calls. Strange. Why would city officials be calling a Hells Angels president?" But there was no time to wonder. The phone had no signal anyway. Steele's breathing was getting shallower. Keisha checked his pupils with her flashlight. One was larger than the other. Possible concussion. She needed to keep him conscious and monitor for signs of brain injury. The rain was making everything worse. Steele's body temperature was dropping, and the blood loss wasn't helping. Keisha used the bike's windscreen and her own jacket to create a makeshift shelter, then pressed her body against his to share warmth. "Come on," she whispered. "Don't you dare die on me." 20 minutes passed, then 30. Keisha's clothes were soaked through, her lips blue with cold, but she never stopped monitoring his vitals. She talked to him constantly, checking his responses, adjusting bandages, doing everything she could with limited supplies. Then she heard engines approaching. 2 Harleys roared through the rain, their headlights cutting through the darkness. They pulled up fast, engines still running. 3 men dismounted, leather, chains, and attitudes that radiated violence. The biggest one approached first, tank top despite the rain, arms covered in tattoos, a scar running from his left eye to his jaw. What the hell happened to Steele? "Motorcycle accident," Keisha called out, not moving from Steele's side. "He's stable but needs immediate medical attention." "Who the hell are you?" The man's voice carried a threat. "Medical volunteer, I'm trying to save his life." The 3 men exchanged glances. One reached inside his jacket, probably for a weapon. The situation was about to turn very dangerous. "Look," Keisha said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I don't care what you think of me. Your president is hurt. He needs a hospital. Help me get him loaded or watch him die. Your choice." Something in her tone must have convinced them. The scarred man, who seemed to be in charge, nodded toward the others. "Tank, get the truck. Razor, call Doc Martinez." "Can't," Razor replied. "A storm knocked out the towers, no signal anywhere." "Then we do this the hard way." The leader looked at Keisha. "What's his condition?" "Concussion, broken leg, possible internal injuries. The head wound looks bad, but it's mostly superficial. He's lost blood, but not enough to be critical. If we can get him warm and dry, he'll make it." "Are you sure about that?" Keisha met his eyes. "I've been keeping him alive for 40 minutes in a rainstorm. I'm sure." Tank returned with a pickup truck. Together, they carefully moved Steele into the truck bed, Keisha maintaining pressure on his bandages throughout the transfer. She climbed in beside him, continuing to monitor his breathing. "Richmond General?" Tank asked. "No," the leader said quickly. "Too many questions. Take him to Doc Martinez's clinic." "He needs a real hospital," Keisha protested. "Not happening. Doc Martinez will handle it." As they drove through the storm, Keisha kept working. Steele's color was improving and his breathing had stabilized. She'd done everything she could with basic supplies, but he was alive. Steele's eyes fluttered open as they pulled into the clinic parking lot. Unfocused but conscious. "Hey," Keisha said softly. "You're going to be okay." He looked at her with confusion, trying to process what he was seeing. A young black girl, soaking wet, covered in his blood, treating him like any other patient instead of the monster everyone else saw. "Thank you," he whispered so quietly only she could hear. As the bikers carried Steele into the clinic, the leader, who'd introduced himself as Razor, pulled Keisha aside. "You saved our president's life tonight. I helped someone who was hurt. That's all." Razor studied her for a long moment. "What's your name?" "Keisha Williams." "Well, Keisha Williams, you just made yourself some very powerful friends. And in this city, that's worth more than money." He pressed something into her hand, a platinum ring with an intricate skull design. "Steele wanted you to have this. It means you're under our protection now. Wear it and nobody in Richmond will ever touch you." Keisha stared at the ring. "I don't want anything from you people." "Too late," Razor said. "You wear that ring or you disrespect everything you just did for Steele. And trust me, you don't want to disrespect Steele Morrison." As Keisha walked away into the storm, the ring heavy in her pocket, she had no idea that her 40 minutes of first aid had just changed the entire trajectory of her life. But as Keisha walked away from the clinic, she had no idea she'd just saved the man who could solve every problem in her life. The storm was finally breaking, rain softening to a steady drizzle. Keisha's clothes clung to her skin and exhaustion was setting in. Her hands shook, not from cold but from the adrenaline crash that followed 40 minutes of life-or-death medical care. The weight of the platinum ring in her pocket felt heavier than any metal. She pulled it out under a streetlight, studying the intricate skull design. The craftsmanship was expensive. This wasn't cheap biker jewelry, and she wanted nothing to do with it. 2 hours later, Keisha sat in Richmond General's emergency waiting room. She'd come to check on Steele's condition, professional curiosity, she told herself. but deep down, she needed to know he was okay. A motorcycle accident victim was brought in earlier, Steele Morrison. I provided first aid at the scene. The nurse's expression changed immediately. Recognition, then wariness. Are you family? Medical volunteer. I just want to know if he's stable. The nurse returned with Dr. Hassan in surgical scrubs. You stabilized him? Dr. Hassan looked skeptical. You saved his life. The head injury would have been fatal without immediate pressure. Your bandaging prevented him from bleeding out. Where did you learn trauma care? Here. Watching. Reading. Before she could say more, Tank and Razor arrived with two other Hell's Angels. The hospital staff tensed. Security moved closer. Where is he? Tank demanded. Sir, visiting hours are... We're family. Razor cut her off, spotting Keisha. Steele's asking for you. Dr. Hassan looked between them nervously. ICU is restricted to immediate family. Tank stepped forward, towering over the doctor. She's family now. The tension was thick. Other patients started leaving. It's okay, Keisha said quickly. I'll go see him. Steele's ICU room was private, expensive. Machines beeped steadily. His leg was casted, head professionally bandaged, but his eyes were alert. You came back, he said, voice rough but stronger. I wanted to make sure you were okay. What's your name? Keisha Williams. How old are you? Keisha Williams? 19. Where do you live? The question caught her off guard. Why does that matter? Everything matters when someone saves my life. Keisha hesitated. The truth felt dangerous. I'm between places right now. Homeless. It wasn't a question. I get by. Steele reached into the bedside table, pulling out a thick envelope. $5,000. Take it. No. What? I didn't help you for money. Steele stared like she'd spoken a foreign language. Everyone wants something. I wanted you to live, that's it. Silence except for beeping machines. Steele searched her face for hidden motives. When he found none, something shifted in his expression. Razor. The scarred biker appeared in the doorway. Give her the ring. She already has it, boss. Did she take it willingly? Razor glanced at Keisha. She tried to refuse it. Steele smiled for the first time since the accident. Of course she did. He looked back at Keisha. That ring means you're under our protection. You're family now. You can't refuse your family. I don't want to be part of your world. Too late. You saved my life. In my world, that creates a debt that can never be repaid. Only honored. Keisha felt the ring's weight again. What does that mean? It means, Steele said carefully, as long as you carry that ring, no one in this city will ever hurt you. And if anyone tries, they answer me. The promise was both comforting and terrifying. As Keisha left the hospital, she slipped the ring onto her finger. Not because she wanted Steele's protection, but because refusing it felt more dangerous than accepting it. She had no idea that wearing Steele Morrison's ring would change everything about her life in Richmond, or that the man she'd saved controlled far more than just a motorcycle club. The ring in Keisha's pocket carried more power than she could imagine, and more danger. Back at her cardboard shelter, Keisha sat under her tarp and stared at the platinum ring. In the dim light of her flashlight, the skull design seemed to watch her back. She'd never owned anything so expensive, so obviously valuable. She pulled out her cracked phone and searched Steele Morrison Richmond. The results made her stomach clench. Arrest records dating back 15 years, drug trafficking charges, assault, racketeering, but every case ended the same way. Charges dropped, witnesses disappeared, evidence ruled inadmissible. Expensive lawyers with impossible win records. One article caught her attention. Morrison Construction wins $50 million city contract. The accompanying photo showed Steele in an expensive suit, shaking hands with Mayor Davidson outside City Hall. The same Mayor Davidson whose missed calls had lit up Steele's phone during the accident. Keisha scrolled through more search results. Morrison Industries appeared everywhere. Construction projects, real estate developments, logistics companies. The skull logo from Steele's ring appeared on building sites across Richmond. This wasn't making sense. Gang leaders didn't usually own legitimate construction empires. Over the next 3 days, Keisha started noticing things she'd never paid attention to before. The Morrison logo was everywhere. On the new medical center being built next to the hospital, on luxury condos downtown, on the construction barriers around major city projects. But more importantly, she noticed how differently people treated her. Walking to her volunteer shift, the dealers who usually catcalled her now nodded respectfully and looked away. The gang members who controlled her neighborhood's corners stepped aside when she passed. Even the police seemed to avoid eye contact. Word had spread. She was protected now. "Keisha?" Mrs. Carter pulled her aside during her shift. "There was a woman here yesterday asking about you." "What kind of woman?" "Professional. Expensive suit. She said she represented someone who wanted to thank you for helping with a medical emergency." Mrs. Carter handed her a business card. Morrison Industries, Executive Relations. The skull logo gleamed in gold foil. "She left this for you," Mrs. Carter continued, producing an envelope. "Said it was urgent." Inside was a handwritten note on expensive paper. "Mr. Morrison would like to meet when you're ready. The choice is yours, but the offer won't wait forever. Victoria Carter, Executive Assistant." A phone number was written at the bottom in an elegant script. Keisha stared at the note. Steele Morrison wanted to see her again, but this time it wasn't about medical care. This was business. The ring on her finger suddenly felt heavier. That evening, she researched Morrison Industries more thoroughly. The company was worth hundreds of millions, maybe more. They owned hotels, restaurants, construction firms, and logistics companies throughout Virginia. But the strangest part was how clean everything looked on paper. No obvious connection to the Hells Angels. No criminal associations. Just a successful businessman with an impeccable reputation, except for the skull logo that matched the ring she now wore, and the missed calls from city officials during a Hells Angels president's motorcycle accident. Keisha was starting to realize that Steele Morrison was much more than a gang leader, but she had no idea how much more. 2 weeks later, Keisha would discover that Steele Morrison wasn't just a criminal. He was the puppet master behind half of Richmond's economy. The call came during her morning shift at the hospital. Mrs. Carter approached with a worried expression, holding the cordless phone. "Keisha, there's someone on the line for you. Says it's urgent." The voice was professional, female, with the kind of crisp authority that came from expensive education. "Miss Williams, this is Victoria Carter from Morrison Industries. Mr. Morrison is being discharged this afternoon and would like to speak with you." I thought he was still recovering. "He is, but there's been a development that requires immediate attention. A car will pick you up at 3 p.m. Before Keisha could refuse, the line went dead. At exactly 3 o'clock, a black Mercedes pulled up to the hospital's employee entrance. The driver was polite but silent, and the car's interior was more luxurious than anything Keisha had ever experienced. They drove through downtown Richmond, past construction sites bearing the Morrison logo, until they reached the city's business district. The Mercedes stopped in front of a gleaming 40-story tower that dominated the skyline. "Morrison Industries corporate headquarters," the driver announced. Keisha had walked past this building dozens of times without really seeing it. Now, staring up at the glass and steel monument, she realized she was looking at an empire. The lobby was marble and mahogany, with the skull logo etched in gold behind the reception desk. Business people in expensive suits moved with purpose, their conversations focused on contracts, acquisitions, and quarterly projections. "Miss Williams?" A woman in her 30s approached, perfectly styled, carrying herself with the confidence of someone who controlled million-dollar decisions. "I'm Victoria Carter. Mr. Morrison is waiting." The elevator climbed to the 40th floor, executive suites, corner offices with views of the entire city. Steele Morrison's office was bigger than some apartments Keisha had seen. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Richmond like a king surveying his kingdom, and behind the massive desk, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, sat the man she'd pulled from motorcycle wreckage 2 weeks ago. He looked completely different. Gone was the leather and intimidation. In its place was a businessman who could have graced the cover of Fortune magazine. "Keisha, thank you for coming. You look—" She searched for words. "Different." Steele smiled, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "I look like myself. The motorcycle club is just one part of what I do." "I don't understand." "Morrison Industries employs 12,000 people across Virginia. We're the largest private construction company on the East Coast. We own hotels, restaurants, logistics firms, and real estate worth approximately $1.2 billion. Keisha's mouth fell open. "Billion?" "The Hells Angels were how I started. 20 years ago, I was just another angry kid from the projects with a talent for violence. But violence only gets you so far. Real power comes from legitimacy. Steele stood and walked to the window, his slight limp the only reminder of the accident. I built this empire by understanding that criminals and politicians aren't so different. Both want power. Both make deals. Both protect their territories. The only difference is the paperwork. You're saying you're both? Criminal and businessman? I'm saying I'm a businessman who understands how the real world works. Every major construction project in this city requires permits, inspections, and approvals. The Hells Angels ensure those processes go smoothly. The implications hit Keisha like a physical blow. You control the city government. I influence it. Mayor Davidson's construction company was failing until I threw some contracts his way. Judge Morrison, my cousin by the way, has been very reasonable about certain legal matters. Police Chief Williams understands that some crimes aren't worth investigating. Steele returned to his desk, opening a leather folder. But this is all ancient history. What matters now is why you're here. He slid a document across the desk. Keisha recognized the letterhead. Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. Your medical school application? Did you know it was submitted 3 months ago? Keisha's blood ran cold. I never applied to Johns Hopkins. I can't afford. Someone applied for you. Someone who had access to your volunteer records, your academic transcripts from community college, and glowing recommendations from Dr. Hassan and Mrs. Carter. That's impossible, Steele smiled. The Morrison Foundation has been funding medical scholarships for promising students from disadvantaged backgrounds for 8 years. Your application was flagged as exceptional even before our accident. The room seemed to spin. You're saying, I'm saying you saved the life of the man who was already planning to change yours. The scholarship you've been awarded includes full tuition, housing, and a $50,000 annual stipend. Congratulations, Dr. Williams. Keisha stared at the acceptance letter. Everything she'd dreamed of handed to her on a silver platter. But the man offering it controlled judges, politicians, and an army of criminals. There's a catch, isn't there? There's always a catch. The Morrison Foundation provides scholarships to students who understand the value of loyalty. You'll be expected to provide medical services to Foundation affiliates when requested. Discreet medical services. You want me to be your personal doctor. I want you to be my family's doctor, the legitimate side and the less legitimate side. People in my world get hurt, Keisha. They can't always go to hospitals. They need someone they trust completely. And if I refuse? Steele's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. You walk away with my gratitude and protection. But opportunities like this don't come twice. Keisha looked around the office. At the view of the city Steele controlled, at the acceptance letter that could transform her life, at the man who'd somehow become her unlikely benefactor. She was 19 years old, homeless, and being offered everything she'd ever wanted, by a criminal kingpin who owned half of Richmond. But Steele Morrison's offer would come with a price Keisha never imagined. I need time to think, Keisha said, staring at the Johns Hopkins acceptance letter. Of course. Steele pressed a button on his desk. Victoria will show you something while you consider. Victoria Carter led Keisha through the executive floor, past conference rooms where men in suits discussed million-dollar deals. At the end of the hallway, she opened a door marked private. Inside was a medical facility that rivaled any hospital emergency room. Surgical equipment, monitoring devices, pharmaceutical supplies, everything needed for trauma care. Clean, professional, and completely off the books. This is where you'd work when our people need help, Victoria explained. Full surgical capabilities, but complete privacy. No questions, no records, no government oversight. How many people need this kind of care? More than you'd think. Construction accidents that can't be reported. Business disputes that turn physical. Sometimes our security personnel face situations that require immediate medical attention. Victoria's careful language couldn't hide the truth. Steele's people got shot, stabbed, and beaten regularly. They needed a doctor who wouldn't call the police. The position pays $200,000 annually on top of your medical school funding, Victoria continued. You'd work perhaps 20 hours per month, emergency calls only. They returned to Steele's office, where he was reviewing contracts with the same focus he'd probably once applied to planning crimes. Questions? He asked without looking up. How do I know you won't ask me to do something that violates my oath as a doctor? Because my people's lives depend on you following that oath. I need someone who saves lives, not someone who compromises their principles for money. Steele finally looked at her. Let me tell you a story, Keisha. 20 years ago, my sister Maria was 16 and pregnant. She was afraid to tell our parents, so she went to a back alley clinic. The doctor was drunk, the equipment was dirty, and she died from an infection 3 days later. His voice remained steady, but something painful flickered across his face. I built this empire partly for revenge, partly for power. But every legitimate business I own, every scholarship I fund, every medical facility I establish, it's all for Maria, so that other kids don't die because they can't afford proper health care. The Morrison Foundation has funded medical education for 43 students over 8 years. 37 are now practicing physicians. They work in hospitals, clinics, and community health centers. None of them know who really funded their education. Steele opened another folder. Dr. Patricia Williams, no relation, graduated from Howard Medical School with Morrison Foundation support. She now runs a free clinic in Southeast D.C. Dr. James Parker operates on children with birth defects in rural Virginia. Dr. Sarah Carter provides addiction treatment in Richmond's worst neighborhoods. They all provide services to communities that can't afford them, Keisha realized. Exactly. I'm not asking you to become a criminal, Keisha. I'm asking you to become the doctor Maria never had. The offer was more complex than simple corruption. Steele was building a network of medical professionals who could serve both his organization and the broader community. What about the Hells Angels, the criminal side? The club handles security for my legitimate businesses. Sometimes that security gets complicated. Sometimes people get hurt protecting assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars. When that happens, I need medical care that doesn't involve police reports or insurance investigations. Steele stood and walked to a wall-mounted display case. Inside were photographs, groundbreaking ceremonies, ribbon cuttings, charitable events. In every picture, Steele stood beside politicians, community leaders, and business executives. Mayor Davidson's re-election campaign received significant support from Morrison Industries. In return, my construction projects face fewer regulatory delays. Judge Morrison ensures that environmental challenges to my developments are handled reasonably. Chief Williams understands that some business disputes are better resolved privately. It's all connected. Everything is connected, Keisha. The question is whether you want to be part of something that builds hospitals and schools, or whether you want to stay pure while people die from poverty. The moral complexity was staggering. Steele used criminal methods to fund legitimate projects that helped thousands of people. His violence served a larger purpose. If I accept, what exactly would you expect from me? Medical school, obviously. Graduate with highest honors. I know you're capable. During school, you'd handle emergency calls maybe once a month. After graduation, you'd establish a practice that serves both my organization's needs and the general community. Like a real doctor. You'd be a real doctor. The Morrison Foundation would help you open a clinic in a neighborhood that needs one. You'd treat anyone who walks through the door regardless of their ability to pay. Some of your patients would be my people. Most would be ordinary citizens who can't afford health care. Steele returned to his desk and pulled out a contract. Full scholarship to Johns Hopkins, $200,000 annual salary during school, $500,000 to establish your practice after graduation, complete autonomy over medical decisions. I don't tell you how to treat patients. And in return, loyalty, discretion, and the understanding that some of your patients will be people society considers criminals. Keisha stared at the contract. Everything she dreamed of was laid out in legal language. Medical school, financial security, the ability to help people who couldn't help themselves. But accepting meant becoming part of Steele Morrison's empire, connected to violence, corruption, and a criminal organization that controlled an entire city. How long do I have to decide? 24 hours. Medical school starts in 6 weeks. If you're going, preparations need to begin immediately. As Keisha left Morrison Industries, the weight of the decision pressed down on her. Accept and become complicit in Steele's world. Refuse and stay trapped in poverty forever. Either choice would change her life completely. 6 months later, the ripple effects of one moment of kindness had transformed an entire community. The transformation started with Keisha herself. Where once she'd slept on cardboard behind dumpsters, she now studied in a furnished apartment near Johns Hopkins campus. The walls were lined with medical textbooks she actually owned instead of library copies. Her desk overlooked Baltimore's harbor, but her heart remained in Richmond. Every weekend, she returned to the city that had shaped her. The Morrison Foundation had arranged for her to shadow Dr. Hassan at Richmond General during breaks, officially as part of her clinical education. Unofficially, she was learning to navigate the complex world Steele had introduced her to. Her first emergency call had come during her second month at Hopkins. A text from Victoria. Medical assistance needed. Warehouse district, discreet. Keisha had found Tank unconscious in an abandoned building, a deep knife wound in his shoulder and obvious signs of a concussion. No questions asked, no police reports filed. She'd treated him with the same professionalism she brought to her hospital rotations. "You're good at this," Tank had said as she finished stitching his wound. "Steele was right about you." Word spread quickly through Steele's organization. The homeless girl who'd saved their president was now a real medical student. More importantly, she was one of them, a family who could be trusted with their lives and their secrets. But Keisha's impact reached far beyond the Hells Angels. The Morrison Foundation's Community Health Initiative, which Steele had expanded after their partnership began, was transforming healthcare access throughout Richmond. Free clinics had opened in 3 underserved neighborhoods. Mobile medical units staffed by Morrison-funded doctors provided care to homeless populations. The statistics were remarkable. Emergency room visits for non-critical conditions had dropped 30% in areas served by Morrison clinics. Infant mortality rates in those neighborhoods had fallen to their lowest levels in decades. Dr. Hassan had been recruited to lead the foundation's medical advisory board. "It's unprecedented," he told local news. "Private funding at this scale focused entirely on community health outcomes. Whoever's behind this foundation understands medicine." Keisha watched the interview from her apartment, knowing that whoever was a criminal kingpin who'd learned the value of legitimate power. Her relationship with Steele had evolved into something resembling mentorship. He called monthly to check on her progress, offering advice that was surprisingly insightful. When she struggled with organic chemistry, he'd connected her with a tutor, a Morrison Foundation alumnus now practicing internal medicine in D.C. "How do you know so much about medical education?" she'd asked during one of their conversations. "I make it my business to understand anything I invest in," Steele had replied. "Your success reflects on my judgment." But it was more than business. Steele seemed genuinely proud of her accomplishments, like a father watching his daughter succeed. When she scored in the top 10% on her first-year exams, he'd sent a bottle of champagne with a note. Maria would have been proud. The criminal side of their arrangement remained carefully compartmentalized. Keisha treated injuries sustained during business disputes with the same clinical detachment she brought to hospital work. A broken arm from a construction accident. Stitches for a motorcycle fall. The euphemisms became their shared language. She learned not to ask questions about how Tank had been stabbed or why Razor needed antibiotics for a gunshot wound that definitely hadn't come from a hunting accident. Her job was to heal, not to judge. The moral complexity no longer kept her awake at night. She was saving lives, both in the hospital and in Steele's shadow world. The motivation mattered less than the results. Richmond itself was changing. Morrison Industries' construction projects were revitalizing entire neighborhoods. The company's hiring policies prioritized local workers, creating jobs for people who'd been locked out of the legitimate economy. Crime rates were dropping in areas where Morrison clinics operated. When people could get health care without going to emergency rooms, when they had access to addiction treatment and mental health services, when their children could see doctors regularly, desperation decreased. Steele's influence over city government had become more sophisticated. Instead of crude intimidation, he now wielded economic leverage. Politicians supported his projects because those projects brought jobs, tax revenue, and positive publicity. "He's become respectable," Mayor Davidson told a business journal. Morrison Industries represents the kind of public-private partnership that builds stronger communities. The mayor probably didn't know that Steele had photos of him accepting an envelope full of cash 3 years earlier. But blackmail had evolved into genuine mutual benefit. By Christmas of her first year, Keisha had treated 17 emergency cases for Steele's organization. She'd also volunteered at 4 Morrison Foundation health fairs, providing free screenings to hundreds of Richmond residents. The girl who'd once hidden from gang members now moved through the city under Steele Morrison's protection, respected by criminals and community leaders alike. Her transformation was complete, but the real changes were just beginning. 1 year later, the ring that started it all would soon find its next owner. Johns Hopkins' graduation ceremony filled Keisha with pride and disbelief. In the audience, Steele Morrison sat quietly in an expensive suit, watching the homeless girl he'd mentored receive her medical degree. After the ceremony, they walked through Baltimore's harbor. Steele moved carefully, his leg never fully healed, a permanent reminder of the night that changed everything. "Ready for the residency?" he asked. "Richmond General Emergency Medicine Program. Dr. Hassan will supervise." Keisha paused. "The clinic opens next month, 6 blocks from where I used to sleep. Full circle." They sat on a bench overlooking the water. Steele pulled out the platinum ring with the skull design. "Time to give this back," he said. "I thought it meant family." "It does, but you don't need a ring to prove that anymore. You proved it when you saved a stranger's life." Steele held up the ring, light catching the platinum. "This was Maria's. I had it made after she died, a reminder of what happens when good people can't get help. You honored her memory. What happens to it now? Waits for the next person who needs protection." The symbolism was clear. The ring would find another deserving recipient. "Actually," Steele continued, "there's a kid at one of our clinics, 17, homeless, incredible medical instincts. Sound familiar?" Keisha smiled. "Tell me about her." "Angela. Lost her parents, living on the streets for 2 years. A natural healer stays calm under pressure. Morrison Foundation is processing her pre-med application. She'll need a mentor. Someone who understands building a medical career from nothing." The cycle was beginning again. Another homeless teenager would receive the opportunity Keisha had gotten. Another life transformed by Steele's complicated justice. Walking toward the parking garage, Keisha felt responsibility settling on her shoulders. No longer the scared girl hiding behind dumpsters, she was Dr. Keisha Williams, emergency physician, community advocate, bridge between Richmond's legitimate and shadow worlds. "One more thing," Steele said, stopping beside his Mercedes. "Angela was brought in last week after helping someone in a car accident. Stayed with them until paramedics arrived and used her shirt to stop bleeding. Just like you." Steele smiled. Some patterns repeat for good reasons. As they drove back toward Richmond, Keisha thought about the girl who would soon wear Maria's ring, another frightened teenager who would discover that helping strangers could unlock impossible opportunities. The platinum ring would wait in Steele's safe until Angela proved herself ready. Some traditions deserve to continue. The Morrison Free Clinic would open with 2 doctors, one established, one beginning. Both understand that healing came in many forms. Keisha's split-second decision to help a dangerous stranger didn't just save one life, it transformed an entire city. From sleeping behind dumpsters to healing in emergency rooms, her journey proves that courage can unlock opportunities in the most unexpected places. Today, the Morrison Free Clinic serves thousands who can't afford health care. Crime rates have dropped in neighborhoods where medical services are available. 3 more scholarship recipients are entering medical school this fall, all because one homeless girl chose compassion over fear. Keisha learned that sometimes the people who need help most are the ones society tells us to avoid. Her 40 minutes of first aid created a ripple effect that continues spreading through Richmond's communities. Your turn. What if your next act of kindness changes everything? Sometimes helping a stranger becomes the best investment you'll ever make. Share this story if you believe courage can transform the darkest situations. Subscribe for more real-life stories of ordinary people finding extraordinary power through compassion. Comment below. Would you have made the same choice Keisha did?
The story you heard today wasn't cleaned up. It was told exactly as it happened. At Black Voices Uncut, we believe that's the only way truth can live. If you felt something, hit like, comment, and your reaction, and subscribe. Every week, we bring you voices that refuse to be silenced.